August 17, 1943. A railway platform, East Prussia. The morning sun beat down on the concrete. General of fighters Adolf Galland stood watching as Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring prepared to board his private luxury train. The conference had just ended, but Galland had one more thing he needed to say, one critical piece of intelligence that could not wait. He approached Göring with a folder of combat reports. Inside were accounts from squadron leaders across Germany, all describing the same thing. American fighter planes appearing deep inside German territory, far beyond where any escort should have been able to reach. If Germany did not adapt immediately, the Luftwaffe would be destroyed. But Göring was not interested in warnings. What happened next, in the brief conversation between Germany's top fighter commander and the head of the Luftwaffe, would seal the fate of thousands of German pilots and change the course of the air war forever. Earlier that morning, German fighters had intercepted a massive American bombing raid targeting Regensburg and Schweinfurt. It had started like every other raid. American P-47 Thunderbolt escorts turned back as expected when their fuel ran low. The bombers pressed on, now unprotected. German fighters moved in for the kill. Then something happened that no one had predicted. More American fighters appeared. Twin-engine fighters, sleek and fast. They engaged German planes over 150 miles inside Germany, a distance that should have been impossible for any escort to reach. The aircraft were Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, carrying external drop tanks that extended their range by hundreds of miles. This was not a fluke. This was a strategic shift that changed everything the Luftwaffe thought it knew about air combat over Germany. Squadron commanders from across the Reich were sending in the same information. American fighters with twin booms were operating deep inside Germany, engaging in full combat. They had enough fuel to fight, enough ammunition to be dangerous, and enough numbers to make a difference. Galland knew what this meant. The entire German defensive strategy was based on one assumption: American escorts would run out of fuel and turn back before reaching critical targets. But if American escorts could reach anywhere in Germany, that strategy was finished. He approached Göring on the platform, presented the intelligence directly. Multiple squadrons had reported P-38 fighters equipped with external fuel tanks engaging over Schweinfurt, over Regensburg, over targets that should have been far beyond escort range. The Luftwaffe needed to adapt immediately. Göring listened, his face reddened, his voice rose. He declared that American fighters had not penetrated that far into Germany. The reports were wrong. The fighters must have been damaged aircraft that had glided eastward after being hit over France or Belgium. They were anomalies, not evidence of any extended range capability. Galland tried to explain. Multiple squadrons had encountered the same aircraft on the same day. These were operational fighters in full combat capability, but Göring cut him off. He stated flatly that it was physically impossible for American fighters to reach that far inland. Then he gave Galland a direct order. Officially, American fighters had not crossed into central Germany. Galland understood immediately. Göring was forbidding acknowledgement of a threat that would require uncomfortable changes. Galland replied with what witnesses later described as an unforgettable smile. "Orders are orders, sir." The train departed. Galland watched it leave. He knew the Luftwaffe had just lost its chance to prepare for a threat that would destroy it. The losses began immediately. On that same day, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 25 to 27 fighters during the Regensburg-Schweinfurt raids. Many fell to the long-range P-38 escorts that Göring insisted were impossible. 3 weeks later, on September 6, 1943, another disastrous engagement proved Galland's warnings correct. Major Egon Meyer led an interception against American bombers striking Stuttgart with P-38 escorts. Meyer was one of Germany's most successful bomber-destroyers with 57 kills. Meyer's squadron attacked from ahead. They scored hits on several bombers. Then P-38 escorts dove from altitude, 3 German fighters were shot down in the first pass. Mayer barely escaped. 5 of his squadron did not return. 3 pilots killed, 2 captured, 0 bombers destroyed. By October 1943, the pattern was unmistakable. American bombers were striking deep into Germany with fighter escorts that Göring had declared impossible. On October 14, 1943, Black Thursday, another Schweinfurt raid resulted in catastrophic losses. The Americans lost 60 bombers, but the Luftwaffe lost 38 fighters. The exchange rate had shifted dramatically. Before long-range escorts, the Luftwaffe destroyed 3 or 4 bombers for every fighter lost. Now the ratio was approaching 1-to-1. Galland compiled detailed reports. June, 87 fighters lost. July, 106. August, 174. September, 193. October, 224. The trend was unmistakable. The ratio of experienced pilots to novices was inverting. In June, 60% of fighter pilots had more than 6 months of combat experience. By October, only 40% did. He sent reports to Göring, to the Air Ministry, to anyone who would listen. The response was silence, but everything was about to get worse. On December 1, 1943, the North American P-51 Mustang entered combat. Early versions had Allison engines that performed poorly at high altitude. German intelligence had concluded they posed no threat. Then North American aviation installed the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The combination created something extraordinary, an American fighter that could fly as high as any German fighter, faster than most at altitude, turn with German fighters, and with twice the range of any previous escort. When fitted with external drop tanks, the P-51 could fly over 800 miles from its base, spend time in combat, and return home. Berlin was 600 miles from England. Every industrial target in Germany was now within reach. On December 13, 1943, 55 P-51 Mustangs escorted B-17 bombers to Kiel, 480 miles from England and 240 miles inside Germany. The Mustangs engaged Luftwaffe interceptors and shot down 6 German fighters without loss. Galland flew to Berlin to meet with Göring in late December. He presented intelligence on the P-51. The P-51 was faster than the Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 at all altitudes. It could turn with German fighters. It had longer range than any previous escort. Galland recommended emergency measures, focus on fighter production, prioritize the Me-262 jet program, accelerate training. Adapt immediately or face strategic defeat. Göring dismissed the concerns. German pilots were superior. The Luftwaffe would prevail through skill and courage. Galland showed him the intelligence reports. Göring refused to listen. The meeting ended. Galland knew the Luftwaffe had sealed its own fate. The American bombing campaign intensified through early 1944. Then, on February 20, 1944, the Americans launched Operation Argument, known as Big Week, 6 days of concentrated attacks on German aircraft factories. Over 3,500 American bombers struck targets across Germany, escorted by swarms of P-38, P-47, and P-51 fighters. The Luftwaffe committed everything. The casualties were catastrophic. The Luftwaffe lost 262 fighters destroyed and another 180 damaged. Approximately 100 pilots killed, 90 wounded, 43 missing. Major Egon Mayer was killed on March 2, 1944. He had 102 kills. He was 29 years old. Hauptmann Kurt Ubben was killed on February 22. He had 110 kills. He was 24 years old. These were the core of Germany's fighter expertise, dying at rates that made replacement impossible. On March 4, 1944, American bombers struck Berlin for the first time with full fighter escort. Over 600 heavy bombers attacked the capital. Escorting them were 174 P-51 Mustangs that flew the entire 1,100-mile round trip. They shot down 16 Luftwaffe fighters and lost only 4. Göring reportedly said privately that when he saw Mustangs over Berlin, he knew the war was lost. But publicly, he continued insisting everything was under control. By April 1944, Galland filed a report directly with the High Command, bypassing Göring. Over the previous 4 months, more than 1,000 pilots had been killed, wounded, or captured. The enemy outnumbered German fighters 6-1. Most American pilots entering combat had 400 to 500 hours of flight time. German pilots were being sent into battle with less than 200 hours. Between January and May 1944, 2262 German fighter pilots were killed, wounded, or went missing. Entire squadrons were decimated. Elite units were being shattered against overwhelming Allied numerical superiority. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord. Luftflotte 3 had 481 aircraft available. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe flew 319 sorties. The Allies flew 14,674. Many Allied soldiers did not see a single German aircraft during the first week of the invasion. By July, Galland was receiving casualty reports showing 50 fighter pilots killed or missing every single day. The Luftwaffe pilot training schools graduated approximately 30 pilots per week. There was no way to sustain operations at these loss rates. In January 1945, Galland was relieved of his command. Göring blamed him for the Luftwaffe's failures. He faced possible court-martial, but Hitler intervened. Hitler allowed Galland to return on one condition: form Jagdverband 44, an elite jet fighter unit equipped with Me-262 aircraft. Galland gathered 10 holders of the Knight's Cross, experienced aces who had survived years of combat. Among them were Johann Steinhoff with 176 kills, Gerhard Barkhorn with 301 kills, and Heinz Baer with 220 kills. They received Me-262 jets in late February 1945. The Me-262 was everything Galland had claimed. Top speed, 540 mph, 100 mph faster than any Allied fighter. In combat, the Me-262 could choose when to engage and disengage. Galland flew his first combat mission in the Me-262 on March 31, 1945. He shot down a B-26 Marauder. Over the next 4 weeks, his squadron destroyed 45 Allied bombers and fighters, but it made no difference. Germany was collapsing. Soviet forces were in Berlin. The fuel supply had ended. On April 26, 1945, Galland flew his last mission. While engaging bombers, his aircraft was hit by a P-47 Thunderbolt. Rounds tore through his canopy. Both engines were hit. Metal splinters struck his right knee. He crash-landed near the airfield. 8 days later, Germany surrendered. Adolf Galland survived the war. He was released in 1947. He worked as a military advisor, then returned to Germany as an aerospace consultant. He published his autobiography, The First and the Last, in 1954. It became one of the most important primary sources on Luftwaffe operations. Galland lived until 1996. He died at age 83. Historians asked when he knew Germany would lose. Galland consistently pointed to August 1943, the moment he tried to warn Göring about long-range American fighters. He had presented evidence. He had recommended immediate action. Göring had given him an order that no such threat existed. That decision, Galland argued, cost Germany any chance of maintaining air superiority. But Göring had refused to acknowledge the threat. He had called it impossible. He had ordered Galland to stop reporting such intelligence, and by the time the crisis became undeniable, it was too late. The Luftwaffe had been shattered. Thousands of pilots killed, the training pipeline collapsed. Germany lost air superiority and never regained it. This is how command failures manifest. Not through dramatic betrayals, but through refusing to accept uncomfortable intelligence, dismissing evidence that contradicts assumptions, punishing subordinates who report problems, giving orders that deny reality rather than adapting. Adolf Galland tried to warn his superiors. He presented facts. He recommended solutions. He was ignored, and thousands of German pilots died as a result, fighting an enemy they had been told did not exist until it was far too late.